taster. I didn't notice the pattern at first, and that's what bothers me the most now. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it changes how you hear silence, how you sit alone in a room, factor, how you look at doors that should stay closed but somehow never quite do. And it all started with something so small I almost ignored it completely, just a faint factor, irregular clicking sounds coming from somewhere inside my apartment late at night, the kind of sound you'd normally blame on pipes or the building settling. Except this one had a rhythm that felt too intentional, like it was trying to become something familiar without fully committing to it. And the first night I heard it, I remember pausing whatever I was doing and just listening, thoder, waiting for it to repeat so I could figure out where it was coming from. But it stopped the moment I focused on it, like it knew I was paying attention, and that should been enough for me to take it seriously. But I didn't, because nothing visible was wrong, nothing moved, nothing broke, and I convinced myself it was just one of those random noises buildings make when everything else is quiet enough to let them exist. So I went to sleep, or at least I tried to, because the second I turned off the lights and lay down, the clicking started again, softer this time, closer, like it had moved without me noticing, after. And I remember lying there completely still, staring into the darkness, trying to map the sound in my head, counting the seconds between each click, hoping it would reveal some kind of pattern I could explain away. Timing kept shifting, almost like it was adjusting itself to match my breathing, and when I held my breath to test that idea, the sound paused too, just for a moment before resuming in a slower, after, more deliberate rhythm that made my chest feel tight in a way I couldn't explain. And that was the first time I thought, very clearly, that something in my apartment was aware of me, not in a dramatic way, not like something was about to jump out or hurt me, but in a quiet, observing way, like it had always been there, and I had just finally noticed it, thoder. And that thought stayed with me even after the sound stopped completely, leaving the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Like the room is holding something back, there, and I don't remember when I fell asleep that night, only that when I woke up, everything looked normal again. Sunlight through the curtains, no signs of anything unusual, and for a while I almost laughed at myself for how uneasy I had felt, until I noticed the chair by my desk was slightly angled toward my bed, just a few degrees off from where I always leave it, there. And I knew I hadn't touched it before going to sleep, because I'm the kind of person who notices small details like that, especially in my own space, and I stood there for a long time just looking at it, trying to decide if I was overthinking it, but something about the angle felt intentional, like it had been turned just enough to suggest someone had been sitting there, watching, factor. And that was when I started paying closer attention to everything, the placement of objects, the way shadows fell in the evening, the sounds that only appeared when I wasn't directly listening for them, after. And over the next few days, I began to notice more things that didn't quite add up, small shifts that could still be explained individually, but felt different when you looked at them together, like the kitchen cabinet that would sometimes be slightly open even though I always closed it fully, or the way my phone would occasionally light up at night without any notifications, just the screen turning on for a second, as if something had brushed against it. And I tried to keep track of these things, to find a pattern or a logical explanation. But the more I paid attention, after, the more inconsistent everything became, like whatever was causing it didn't want to be predictable, and that made it harder to dismiss, because randomness feels more intentional than order when you're alone, And then there were the nights, which became the worst part, because the clicking sound returned every evening, always starting at a different time, always from a slightly different place, sometimes near the walls, sometimes from above, sometimes so close, it felt like it was coming from inside the room itself rather than the structure around it. And I started to develop rules without realizing it. After, small things I would do to avoid making the sound change, like not turning my head too quickly, or not speaking out loud when it was happening, because the one time I did whisper something, just a quiet hello into the darkness, the clicking stopped immediately and didn't come back for the rest of the night, which should felt like relief, but instead felt like I had broken something better, like I had acknowledged it in a way I wasn't supposed to. And after that, I avoided interacting with it directly, treating it like something that could only exist. As long as I pretended it wasn't there, Thor. And for a while that seemed to work, or at least it kept things from getting worse, until the night I woke up and realized the clicking wasn't coming from the room anymore. It was coming from behind my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate taps spaced out just enough to make me anticipate the next one before it happened, and I remember sitting up in bed, completely still, staring at the door, trying to convince myself it was something in the hallway, maybe a neighbor or a loose fixture, but the sound was too precise, too controlled, like someone was standing just on the other side, tapping with a finger, waiting for a response. And I didn't move, I didn't speak, I just listened as it continued for what felt like hours, until eventually it stopped again, leaving that same heavy silence. And I stayed awake until morning, not because I was afraid of what might happen if I slept, but because I had the overwhelming feeling that if I closed my eyes, even for a second, after, something would change in a way I wouldn't be able to explain when I woke up. And that's exactly what happened anyway, because the next day, the door looked different. Not damaged, not visibly altered, but wrong in a way that's hard to describe, like it wasn't quite the same door anymore, like the proportions were slightly off, or the color was just a shade darker than it used to be. And I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I was imagining things, but the feeling was too specific to ignore. Like looking at a familiar face and realizing something about it has changed, even if you can't immediately say what. And that was when I started to wonder if the changes weren't just happening around me, but to the space itself, slowly, subtly, in ways that wouldn't be obvious unless you were paying very close attention after. And once that thought settled in, everything started to feel less stable. Like the apartment wasn't as fixed as I had believed, like it could shift when I wasn't looking, and I began noticing gaps in my memory, small ones at first, like not remembering exactly when I had moved from one room to another, or how long I had been sitting in the same spot, and I tried to brush it off as stress or lack of sleep, but deep down I knew it was connected to the same thing as sees the clicking, the same quiet presence that seemed to exist just outside of direct awareness, after. And the worst part was the growing sense that it wasn't just observing me anymore. It was learning me, adapting to my habits, my reactions, the way I moved through the apartment, and I started to feel like I was being studied in a way that was patient and methodical, like whatever it was had no urgency, no need to reveal itself, because it knew I wasn't going anywhere, and that's when I made the mistake of trying to leave, not permanently, just for a night, thinking that some distance would help me reset, clear my head, prove to myself that everything I had been experiencing was just a result of being alone too long. But when I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, I heard the clicking again, immediately, clearly, from the other side of the door, as if it had been waiting right there the entire time, and I stood there, frozen, hand still on the handle, realizing that whatever was inside hadn't stayed behind, It had followed me to the threshold, and for a moment I had the strongest urge to open the door again, not out of curiosity, but because it felt like something was expecting me to, like I had interrupted a routine that needed to be completed, and I don't know how long I stood there before I finally walked away. But even as I left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that the distance didn't matter, that whatever had been watching me wasn't limited to that space, that it had simply chosen it as a starting point, after, and that thought stayed with me all the way through the night, through every place I went, every room I entered, because no matter where I was, there were moments where everything would go just a little too quiet, factor, where I would catch myself listening for something I couldn't hear anymore. And that's when I realized the worst part of all of it wasn't the sound or the changes, the after, or even the possibility that something had been in my apartment with me. It was the way it had taught me to notice, to pay attention to things I used to ignore. Because now, even in complete silence, after, I can't shake the feeling that there's still a pattern there, still something just out of reach, waiting for me to recognize it again. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is perfectly still, after, I catch myself holding my breath, without even realizing it, just to see if something else will pause with me.